Jason. Welcome to the show. So happy to have you on today.
It's so great to be here. Thanks, Moshe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, why don't you start us off with a quick introduction of your background? You've had a fascinating journey. So, walk us through that.
Absolutely. So my name's Jason Shen. I'm an executive coach to outlier founders, leading them through hard pivots in business and life. I also am the author of a book called The Path to Pivot. Um, and I have spent, the last 14 years of my career has been in building product teams and companies that are trying to change the way we do things. I have been involved in B2B, consumer, and marketplace companies at Etsy, Meta, and three of my own venture-backed startups. I was born in Suzhou, China, and grew up in cold winters of New England before getting about 9 years in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, which really opened my eyes to what's possible. And then I've spent the last 10 years here in New York City, where I live with my wife, Amanda. She's a multidisciplinary artist, so we are quite the creative couple, and live in Crown Heights, which is, I guess, close to your old stomping grounds.
That's right. That is my old stomping ground. I lived in Crown Heights for 9 years. So, they have that connection. I noticed that you have um, a Guinness record and a Guinness World Record. And that's not something that I come across every day. So I had to ask. We could start with that.
Yes.
What made you do that? What was that experience like?
Yeah. So I have a Guinness World Record in Aztec push-ups. Most number of Aztec push-ups completed in 1 minute, which are a kind of push-up where you have your hands on the ground and you kind of explode off of the ground and you touch your toes in the air and then kind of go back into the push-up position and kind of repeat that. Um, so I sort of achieved that in 2014. I also set a new Guinness World Record in 2018 for burpee pull-ups, which were going back down to the ground, getting up and doing a pull-up. That's been rebroken, so I'm no longer the current record holder. So someone has surpassed me, but still hanging on to the Aztec push-up one. And so hopefully that I can retain that title for a bit longer. But
So one wasn't enough. You had to go for another one.
I like to challenge myself physically. I spent 16 years as a competitive gymnast, 10 of those at a national competitive level, both in the Junior Olympics and in NCAA. And we did have the good fortune of winning an NCAA championship at Stanford in my final year with the team. So that was a wonderful journey. But then after that, you sort of need, it's a big hole in your life to fulfill. So whether it's like at one point running and doing longer distances to these sort of so it was almost like every 4 or 5 years I got to do something interesting. I did the burpee, the Aztec push-ups, the burpee pull-ups, and then this past fall I did 1,000 burpees over a live stream while raising money for a nonprofit I'm a part of called Lunar Excel. So
So
I would
you
say
pushed yourself.
I like to push myself, and it's in many ways I'm even more comfortable pushing myself physically than I am as in intellectual or even business pursuits, which is something I'm you know working through with my own coach, but to understand. But I would say two things I'll say from that experience that are maybe worth sharing is one, there are 40,000 Guinness World Records. So there's a Guinness World Record for everybody. I'm convinced that, most of the people listening to this podcast could set some kind of Guinness World Record if they were willing to put the, effort and planning and organization to look at your own strengths, which is something we'll talk more about, right? And two, again, knowing your strengths and knowing the rules are really important. So with these Aztec push-ups, one, it requires explosiveness and flexibility, things that I developed as a gymnast, things that, there are some incredible, like most number of push-ups, period, or pull-ups with a weight vest that I'll never be able to break. But this one required a certain level of coordination that most people just don't have, which made it an ideal record for me to go after. The second thing is, the Guinness has very detailed, once you apply to set a record, there's a whole process and it takes a long time, which is another barrier. there are some very detailed explanations. And one of the things that you would think is that you need to actually bend your arms, but there was no requirement that you needed to bend your arms any particular amount. And so while it's kind of easier to bend, it's sort of a natural understanding to bend your arms and push off like that. I found that I could actually use sort of my shoulders, which is again a skill I learned in gymnastics, to kind of explode just through your shoulders, and you keep your arms straight, so you save time. It's less energy
Mm.
expended, and I was able to do them more rapidly. So I was able to take the previous record, which was 32, to 50. So I feel like I put some good distance on that one. And again, I recommend everybody go to the Guinness World Records site and kind of scroll around, and I bet there's something that they could find for themselves.
Yeah. The lesson, or I think the practical application, is to know your strengths, to play on those strengths, and to find what makes you unique, which I think is a big part of the exercise that we're going to talk about today around annual planning. So we are recording here in December. Obviously, everybody is working on wrapping up their year and prepping to go into 2024. I came across your video on YouTube, really fantastic video. I'm going to leave a link to that in the show notes so people can go through that exercise. So we're not going to do the whole thing here. Do that on your own time. I highly recommend it. But I did want to go over kind of the framework that you present, which I found very useful to help people kind of take stock of where they're at and what they're looking to accomplish moving forward, and also to tailor that for founders specifically. So as a founder, you want to do a personal assessment where you're at in life, but also for your company, for your startup, and set goals as part of that process. So let's start with just kind of the overall, how you broke down the annual planning session. What are the three components?
Yeah, absolutely. So this annual review template that and this video that you're mentioning is sort of like the latest iteration of a practice that I've had for probably 7 years now, where I would go and sort of do a reflection. And me and my wife and one of our close friends, we're planning that right now for the next week or two. And over time, I've developed it and changed it, and now provided this framework for others to share. The three major components of it is looking back on the last year and sort of taking stock of what happened, checking in, which is sort of looking at the current moment, this present time, and where you are in this moment, and then charting ahead, which is about thinking about the future, right? So you sort of have that grounding from the past, you kind of take stock in the moment, and then you start to make plans for the future. So that's sort of high level. We could kind of break down each segment.
Yeah, I love systems of threes. I don't know if there's like some science behind why threes work, but you have three categories, and then each of those three categories have three subcategories, which makes it really easy to kind of follow along. So within the looking back, you have moments, achievements, lessons. Each of those kind of give you a different angle to take stock of the past year, right? Anything that you want to add within the looking back section as you're going through the prior year? What are you looking out for?
Yeah. So at a high level, I want to say that one of the things the reason why things like this are so important, and you can do a review like this at any time, but it's just natural to do it at this time because of the fresh start effect, which is a psychological principle that makes people more willing to make changes during visible milestones, whether it's your birthday, whether it's the start of the month or the end of the year. So don't lose stock or don't lose momentum if this is a kind of just because everyone else is doing it at the end of the year doesn't mean you shouldn't take advantage of that. But also recognize if you're listening to this in the June, right? It's like the halfway mark. You could also use that as like a time to reflect and find that moment and that milestone. The other thing I'll say about reflecting in general is that Moshe, you've probably heard that phrase like you either win or you learn, right? And people will like to spite that out and sound so wise because it's like, oh, don't be afraid to try anything because you'll either win or you learn. Well, you don't always learn. Is my quick rebuttal. Like sometimes you do get into a pickle and then you don't even know what happened, and it requires digging in and reflecting to actually learn the lesson. And so that's why these things don't happen for free, right? You don't just go through. Some people have 10 years of experience. Some people have 1 year of experience repeated 10 times. And if you don't reflect, then you're really in that first category because you make the same mistakes. So that's my opening spiel here. For the look back segment, I'll say that I used to just do wins and lessons. And I actually added moments because I wanted to emphasize the fact that some of the things that happen in our life don't even sort of take place within this framework of like achievements, right? And when you're a business, you're probably thinking a lot about achievements. You're probably thinking a lot about like results that we delivered, capabilities that we are, have brought online, or sort of major outcomes. And those are important to acknowledge, right? As a business. But it's also important to sort of acknowledge the experience of things that you had, right? And these are sometimes things that aren't captured. It's sort of like the investments that you might have had to make to produce the outcome, right? Or things that were maybe not so great, that were just like a difficult time. It's important to acknowledge that those things happened and to have a record of that, because when you look back in the future, if you ever look back on this review, you'll be kind of reminded not just of, oh, these great things happened, but like you get a more honest reflection of your experience, and it forces you to kind of go back. And I recommend going back into your calendar and going back through like past, like, quarterly reviews, and like really scrub through that, because you probably have forgotten. You can easily forget. I don't know about other people, but my memory of what I was doing in January and February and March of last year is pretty limited at this point. So actually going through and rifling through the documents that you had at that time will be helpful. So that's moments, and then achievements. And then lessons are that, yes, oftentimes they come from things that didn't go so well. You start to dig into it, like, what happened? Why didn't it go so well? And to articulate those lessons to help you remember for yourself what to do in the future, or what the better way to approach something. Even if it went well, you might realize, wow, there's still even more opportunity here. Like, why did this succeed? Right? It's not just the things that you failed at that you should learn lessons from, but also the things that you succeeded in. What is the takeaway here? It's not just, I'm a genius and everything is anything I do is going to work. It's like, well, there was a lot of great market momentum for us, or we trusted somebody's opinion, and maybe we should hold things less close to our chest, what have you. So I think those are some of the nuances and shades that I would put on this segment of the review.
Yeah, I like your preamble there. You're right that you don't learn unless you take the time to take those moments of reflection and dig into the lessons learned. It doesn't just happen on its own. So that is important. On the moments part of it, you're recommending to document the highs and the lows, right? It's not just about wins only. It's any sort of peak memory, right? Anything that stood out for the year. Is that right?
Absolutely. And, I think it will, because entrepreneurs, the business is such a big part of their life, like you're really kind of doing yourself a service for your own life, more broadly speaking. And part of this is for the business. Part of it is for you. Maybe it's for your team, right? Like your people who work at your company invest so much into their lives, into this. And so being able to capture both the happy and, less happy times. And maybe, even if you have photos, like, these days, like, it's like, if there's no photo, did it even happen? Right? Like, get some of those materials into there so that you can, and because it's like I have like a video and a Google Slides version, you can like put pictures into the slide, right? So that you have some sort of physical documentation of what happened.
Yeah, scrolling through your camera roll, I find to be one of the best ways to kind of relive the year. Otherwise, everything's just a blur in my memory.
It's so true. It's so true.
You touched on something important. From founders are so intertwined with their business, their identity, their life, more so than I think just a typical professional. Do you recommend doing this exercise twice once for kind of a personal and once as, putting on the CEO hat? Or how, as a founder, do I go through my review and planning wearing both hats, right? As an individual, my personal goals, achievements, moments, but as a founder.
Yeah, I think there's two ways I could see people approaching this. One is you do it either alone or maybe with your co-founder, someone that you have a really close, deep kind of relationship with, at the kind of trusted cohort there. And then the second is to do it with maybe a larger leadership team, or if you have a small organization, like maybe the whole team. And it is going to be different when it's like and sort of everyone will kind of have their own individual document. And I think that's part of what can work around this, is that you each sort of like have your own document, and then you could contribute to like a group document. So there's like together, but individual, and then there's together and on like a single fig jam canvas or something, right? So really three approaches with the individual, with your co-founder or in alone, kind of separately but together, and then you can kind of share out as you do it and kind of say it publicly, and then you can have the like fully, it's all there, it's all public. And yes, you're going to have to tailor to some degree your experiences to that front, but there's also the benefit of being able to see broadly across your team like all these different memories and moments that people had. It's like a big scrapbook almost.
Yeah. And I think we're pretty used to doing kind of team retrospectives or end of year reviews in this similar kind of format. So taking lessons from this, even if you're not doing the full exercise with the team, but taking elements from it and using that in the retrospective format can be helpful at a team level and a company level. So moving on with the framework, and again, the structure is looking back, checking in, and chart ahead, or almost like a past, present, and future kind of narrative. So with the check-in step, what do we do there?
Yeah. So with check-in, we have three segments. We have the life audit, we have start, stop, continue, and we have write to your future self. I think each of these can be adapted, right? The life audit, the segments that we talk about are like friends and community, love and relationships, fun, money, career. So some of these are professional, but this is obviously adapted for the full human experience. As an entrepreneur, as a business leader, you're probably going to want to have your own kind of set of criteria. So you might want to talk about financial results. You might want to talk about like product development and product progress. You might want to talk about customers, customer satisfaction or customer retention. And then you might want to talk about team, team health, team morale, team growth, and processes, right? So you really have to think for yourself and adapt some of these metrics to kind of meet your needs. And the way it works is we set a range from 1 to 10, and we sort of say what 10 is sort of like the best possible world where things are going as well as they could, and 1 is they're doing terribly. And you have to select a numerical rating while skipping 7. So the key is 7 is kind of like your I'm not making a call on this. I'm sort of saying it was fine. And so we're sort of forcing you to say like either it was good or it's not good. 7 is the line, right? 8 is above the line. 6 is below the line. So no 7s. Make a call and see if you're. I think what's interesting about doing this in a group would be that you would get to see the different scores and see how people shake out on this. So it might be interesting to get a tool that lets you. There's a product called Planning Poker, which lets you rate points for agile sprints, but you could kind of use something like that or something similar to see where people show up on a Mentimeter. Might also let you do that, like rate a particular thing and then kind of see all the results coming at once. So then you can have a conversation about like, are we on the same page about what good looks like? And what would it take for us to improve this? Or are we happy with where it's at because this is not a priority for us right now? So those are all really important conversations that we can have through doing this audit.
Right. And that audit on the business side could be other um, subcategories around, whether it's communication, collaboration, how are we doing with goal setting, and even team events. Like, you can break it out in uh, with the parameters that are relevant to that check-in that you're doing with the company, and using those measurements to then adjust. Um, you mentioned writing a letter to your future self. I found that to be really interesting and unique. That is something I have not done. I have done, similar kind of annual planning and retrospectives, but writing a letter to the future self, what does that accomplish? What does that look like?
Yeah. So for some people that might feel a little like out there, like, what is this? I'm communicating with myself. I remember doing a version of this in high school, right? In freshman year, your teachers had you write a letter to yourself that you read in senior year.
Did you put it in one of those capsules you have to bury in?
Oh, we didn't bury it. They just like collected the letter and then they like brought it back to us, 4 years later. Um, and But I think what's important about this is twofold. One, our memory is so limited. It's so unreliable. So it's easy to forget about good or bad experiences that we have, and it tends to be tainted by whatever the end result is. If the end result is good, you kind of like, yeah, the whole thing was good. The end result is bad, you're kind of like, well, everything about this sucked. And so this lets you stay honest and say, right in this moment, here's how I feel about my business or about my team or about whatever else is going on. um, and it's also because it's good to kind of come obliquely at some of the things that you're experiencing. So for this, I might say something like, in gymnastics, you have to learn to do different skills and you have to get stronger. And a lot of strength is, you're doing your conditioning workouts. But if you do the same 3 exercises every day, if you just do push-ups, squats, and sit-ups, like, you're going to get stronger, of course, but only in very specific dimensions. And your body kind of like understands that. But then if you do something a little bit different, if you do a dip or if you do a handstand push-up, all of a sudden you're kind of training different parts of your body and you're moving in different ways that are unexpected. And so a reflection is trying to get you to think about your life, your business in a variety of ways, because you probably don't think about them in this way as often. You don't think about speaking to the self 12 months from now that often. And so this new pathway might unlock new insights. That's why we're doing this kind of an activity to kind of stretch your brain in a new dimension.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and something I'm excited to try. So moving on to the last portion of the exercise, charting ahead. What do you recommend there?
So we have kind of 3 parts there. We have the long list of things that you'd like to have happen, the short list, which is really about recognizing that you can't have everything all at once and you can't prioritize all your same things. And so really using a sort of diverge, converge, allow yourself to kind of go wild with what would be possible and what would be interesting for you. And then try to narrow in and really make some tough calls about what's most relevant for your business. What are the outcomes that you'd most like to achieve? And frankly, a lot of your goals may relate to each other, right? If you want to make more revenue, launching a second product may be the most important thing to do that. Or it might be improving sales of your existing product line. And so what's more important? Is it the outcome of the new revenue, or is it about strategically, we got to get this product out, even if revenue doesn't grow quite as fast as we wanted it to, because this is what is important and right for the business. So trying to cut down and prioritize that list is really important. I struggle with prioritization as well. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs want it all, and we know we can't actually do that, but our emotional brain wants to. And then the final section of that is, sure, it's great to make a list of things that you should do, but it's really like, what are the things that are going to help you get there? Now, in a personal life, that might be, if you want to lose weight and that's the result, having a glass of water, stretching and doing some movement in the first thing in the morning might be, your mechanism, your controllable input, right? The goals might be your outputs, the outcomes, things that are sort of, require participation from the external world. The system are really the things that are in your control, right? And in sales, it might be like sales activity, right? How many dials are you going to make? How many emails are you going to send out? That's in your control. What people do as a response is not in your control. So actually explicitly calling out that in order to achieve these results, you're going to need to make certain investments in your own activities, in your own processes and systems, and sort of connecting that dot is really important.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from James Clear from Atomic Habits. He writes that you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems, right? Systems are where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and things actually get done.
Absolutely. It's so true. And, I think entrepreneurs have a love-hate relationship with systems, right? Like we often start our own companies because we wanted to get out of somebody else's system. And then ironically, we're now in charge of creating a system for other people. And so grappling with that idea that, you have to, create a system for yourself and for other people. You get to choose the system, you manage the system for yourself, but it's hard to be free of systems altogether and have a functioning organization at any scale.
Sure. So with this exercise, you've been doing it for a number of years as a coach with clients. Where do you see individuals or entrepreneurs stumbling most frequently? What should we watch out for when we do this?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you got to come back to it. So it's you get some of the benefit by just doing it this one time, and you're internalizing some thoughts. But I think the real power, and what I try to do with my own personal friend group, is we set quarterly check-ins where we come back and look at what we said earlier, and we kind of review that and keep that top of mind, so it doesn't just kind of get lost in the shuffle, which happens, and things do change. It's not like you have to stick to this exact plan now for the whole year, but it is a good reminder of like, well, has the world changed, or do I just feel differently today about it? And if the world's changed, it makes sense that goals may change, investments to change. But if the world is still kind of like what it was when we created this document, then there's no reason why we should just deviate, arbitrarily on this. And so I think that's kind of the first thing I would say. In terms of other mistakes that people make, it takes a decent amount of time to do this. So it's easy to underestimate how long this will take. I have this video that I run that's like, 2 hours or something long. And realistically, if you're doing it with other people, it might even take 3 hours. You might even have to split it up into 2 sessions because of how long it takes. And so I've definitely, run into the issue for myself where we're doing it, we set aside 2-3 hours, and then we realize, what, we've only gotten through half of this. So establishing enough time to actually get it done is important.
Yep, absolutely. Let's shift gears. I want to talk about resilience. I found in working with startups, in interviewing founders in this podcast, resilience is one of the highest indicators of success for startups. You have a great line in your book: "We didn't run out of money, we ran out of resilience." Well, first question is resilience something that you have or you don't have? Is that a skill or a muscle that can be trained?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for starting with this topic. I have that line in my book because I had a startup that went through Y Combinator, and we had raised $1.2 million, which in 2011 was like a pretty decent seed round, and we were tackling this long distance ride sharing space until we hit like a pretty hard brick wall with our growth, and our main channels for growth, and we had to attempt to pivot. And after 6-9 months of that, we were unable to make the pivot. Even though we didn't run out of money, we still kind of folded the business. And so that's when I say, like, we didn't run out of resources. We still had money, several $100,000 left in the bank, and we just, didn't feel like we could kind of keep pushing on it. And so uh, I define resilience as the ability or capacity to overcome change and adversity to achieve your goals. So that in its of itself is, when you say capacity or an ability, that's obviously something that is more of a skill than it is a sort of innate quality, right? It's not like my eyes are blue, you have resilience or you don't have resilience. It is a complex capacity, right? And it can be achieved through many mechanisms, or actually, there's a series of mechanisms that work together. There's, our ability to respond in the face of change. If you're really good at that, you probably see like these firefighters who can always jump from one, problem to the next, and they can kind of just like go from it's a huge burning issue to, hey, it's like we're in a stable place. That's one sort of facet of resilience. Another facet is the restoring, which is like overcoming the sort of loss and the pain, whether that's like, the sort of physical healing or the kind of like patching up and repairing of whatever it is that you're working on, and going from like, hey, we stopped the bleeding to, all the pieces are picked up and we're kind of in a better place. Then there's rebuilding, which is more about like once you sort of have that um, once you have some of yourself kind of reconstituted, and the major threat is out of question, sort of like, how does things change? So part of resilience is that overcoming resilience may cause you to change who you are and what your goals are. So like what your goals are may evolve through the process of adapting. If you when our growth channel stopped working, we had to adapt by saying, we need to be a different kind of business, not just, oh, we got to go find another growth channel. It was like, this isn't even viable. And so recognizing that experimental nature of creating something new is part of resilience. And then finally, reflecting, which is about learning lessons. And if you don't learn lessons like we're talking about with this review process, you're probably going to run into the exact same issue all over again. And that's not, it's like if your basement floods the first time you have water, okay, you couldn't have seen that coming. Next time, you're just that's really your own fault. Like you understood that your basement is flood prone, and if you haven't made corrective measures to resolve that, even if you patched everything up and put it back in place, and decided to do something different with your basement, you haven't stopped the new issue from coming. But it's also the last part of it is telling your story. So part of why I include this in the book is I'm practicing resilience by telling the story of my first company's failure, because if you can't talk about something that's happened to you, you have not fully recovered from it. Sorry, I have the reaction here of the sticking up thumbs up here. If you can't really tell the story about something difficult that's happened to you, you haven't fully recovered from it. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to put all their sort of dirty laundry out into the world, but you've obviously run across people who have had something, some difficult experience, and they just say, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I'm not going there. That's usually a sign that, you haven't fully gotten over it. And, you can't really be over it until it's sort of not a sort of so painful thing for you to kind of like mentally grapple with. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, I do think it is a skill.
Yeah, it certainly is. And the I think that there's a gray area, or not a very clear line between when you need to be resilient in the sense of pushing forward, and when you need to be resilient in terms of accepting, I'm putting air quotes around, defeat, and figuring out what's the next path forward. I just saw a tweet from Jenny Fielding from Techstars. She wrote that first time founders tend to stay longer at a problem even when it's not working, whereas repeat founders seem to, in her data set, kind of call it quits once they realize that, hey, this isn't going to work. Uh, Not necessarily is one better than the other, but I think that each one requires its time and place, or has its time and place, and requires a different approach depending on the circumstance. How do you know, or how do you recommend founders take stock of the situation and say, you know what, we're just having a tough month. We need to keep pushing forward because we're right there. We're about to crack this open. Versus, hey, the writing's on the wall. You guys don't have product market fit, or whatever it is. This channel isn't working. It's time to pivot or find something new.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. And I think her point about first time founders, I think part of the reason is that when you're a first time founder, there's this sense that um, you don't want to lose this opportunity. And you're sort of afraid of admitting failure or defeat because, you're not able to, you're afraid that that will mean this is sort of the end of the road for you and there's no future opportunities. Like that the psychic death of your company is like the psychic, you're sort of like, it's all over. But when you're a second time founder, you realize like, well, either way, like whether it was a good outcome or not a good outcome for your first business, like at some point that business does go away. Now you're in a second one. Then it's a lot easier to think about like, okay, my third business, my fourth business, what am I, all of these are possible. So you get maybe a little bit less precious about some of the things you've done. And similarly, you realize how many different ways there are to succeed in business. And so if a particular tactic isn't working, like there are other tactics out there, there are other products out there, there are other customers to sell to, other markets to kind of enter. And finding the right fit between your product and your market, or you as a founder and the kind of industry you want to be in, or even the type of business you want to be in, is more important in a lot of ways than like any particular thing that you're doing. Like even my own, as I reflect on my career and moving into coaching full time and sort of writing and these other things, I think this is really the kind of business that makes more sense for me. I've done several venture-backed businesses and, I've had some modest success, but I think what I got out of that was a realization that like actually it might be I like doing business and I like the kinds of ideas and the kinds of things that we get to explore in running businesses, but I want to do it in a new fashion, in a new way. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I certainly think that there's a lot of different reasons for why you quit something or give up. If it's because, oh, it's hard, then that's a bad reason, right? And I think a lot of that's the natural first step is like, oh, this is hard, so I want to quit. And we rightfully say don't quit if it's just because it's hard. But where this gets tricky is, am I quitting because it's hard, or am I quitting because there's actually probably a better opportunity out there for me? Am I justifying to myself that I think there's a better opportunity, or is it really just that it's too hard? That's I think the dilemma that is the real question about whether to sort of quit or keep sticking it out.
Yeah. Is fear of failure the most common reason why people make these type of self-limiting decisions?
Well, I mean, I think we all have a healthy fear of failure, and there's nothing wrong with fearing failure per se. I think the real question is, what kind of failure do you fear most? So, if I might talk a little about one of the ideas from the book, I talk about this idea of the zombie startup trap that people need to escape, right? A zombie startup was a term coined by Al Morrill in 2012, 2013. She had a startup called Referly, and she was sort of saying, I think we're a zombie startup, meaning we look alive, but we're not really alive. We're sort of growing, but not really. And this isn't a venture backable business. And this book, The Path to Pivot, is written for venture backed founders. I mean, there's some advice that's relevant across any entrepreneur's journey, but in particular, the calculus of if you are growing at a very slow or flat rate, or the market that you're in does not seem particularly big and you seem to be starting to saturate it, you have a big problem, right? And yes, you are sort of theoretically safe in the moment, because you're it's not, it's easy to change your business when nothing is happening or the sales are plummeting. Um, and of course, if you're growing really quickly, you're fine, you're great, good for you. Keep trying to hold on, right? But it is this sort of middling growth, mediocre scenario that you actually have to be the most aware of, because it's not setting off alarm bells, right? And you get kind of comfortable in this modest state. And so my advice to founders in that capacity to say, you're actually failing, right? You're actually failing to build a venture-backed business. And there are many other kinds of businesses out there to build, bootstrapped, self-funded, and profitable. And of course, that's all well and good. But if you signed up for this, this is what you're supposed to swing for, $1 billion, or these days, really $10 billion plus outcome, right? That's what your investors are looking for. That's what makes the math on this work. That's the reason you're supposed to be in this game. So remember that, and actually recognize that it's better to strike out than to keep going in this middling result that won't satisfy anybody and kind of potentially consume a lot of your time. Because the other kind of failure that can be is that you spend 6 years of your life on something that doesn't have a really great result, when you could spend 2 years, find out that it doesn't work, and then move on to something else, whether it's another company or go work somewhere and make more money, frankly, than what you're probably making as this, founder who's probably not paying themselves market rates to keep this like mediocre business alive.
I'd add one more category to that, which is we're seeing this now in the post ZIRP world, that a lot of companies, they just raised too much and they can never grow into their prior valuations. And those are essentially zombies for a different reason, just because, either they recap, or they take a cram down, or they get sold for parts. But at the end of the day, they're never going to grow into that valuation that they had, and that results in this state of kind of in between, where even if growth is decent, that's not enough. And to your point, this applies specifically to venture-backed businesses. You sign a deal with the devil, and I'm not calling VCs devils. It's a fantastic asset class and type of risk capital for specific types of businesses. But when you hop on that train, you can only get off with IPO and potentially an exit. Although now, as we saw with Figma and Adobe, I don't know if acquisition is even an exit path anymore. Now it's just IPO.
Yeah.
So you get on that train, you gotta stay on till the next station, and that's
that can be the station can be very far away, right? And I think, but even in those cases, that I would argue that the pivot is sort of like your only real move. And so to kind of like make the argument here, what I argue in the book is actually that more entrepreneurs are in the sort of zombie startup state than they realize, and that they need to actually sort of catch themselves and get out of it by executing a pivot. Now, pivots sound very risky because you're leap into the unknown. You got something working. Why would you just leave that? And so one of the things I say is, like, it's actually a process rather than just a single, one big jump, right? And what I advocate is you have this framework: align, explore, commit. So align is really this idea of like, hey, let's get everyone on the same page. Let's actually get together and admit to ourselves, like, we actually need to be at a higher growth rate, a much higher growth rate than we are. And there's no viable path for us to get to that growth rate in the immediate future, right? And that means that we have to be able to see that reality together. And if you can see that reality together, what you can do is put that business on maintenance mode. If it's like working at all and like, bringing in some revenue or, generating some growth and visibility and, activity in the market, there's usually, everyone knows that there's probably a way for you to run that business with minimal, hands-on activity, right? And you just sort of let your customers self on board. You don't do as much, outbound acquisition. You support the customers and the product that you have, and you just kind of leave it alone. And you give yourselves 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, depending on your business, depending on your time frame. and you spend the majority of your time examining new opportunities. So this allows you to kind of like feel like you can still go back to your business afterwards if you really wanted to, and it takes off somehow while you investigate, and you can have a little bit less time pressure to say what makes sense for us. What are some of the assets that we've developed? What are some of the insights that we recognize about the marketplace? What are some trends that we see that we could capitalize on? And how do we find a narrow enough problem area and a customer segment, maybe in our existing segment, right? That's why you shouldn't just go and shut down your own business, because you might go to your existing customers and be like, hey, we want to sell you something completely different. Just bear with us here. Like, would you buy this, or how would this work for you, right? And find some seedlings, try to start that next fire, and then come back and to be very disciplined about saying in 6 weeks and 8 weeks, we promise we will come back and decide whether to go back to your old business or go to the new business, right? And the hope is that you find something meaningful enough in those 4, 6, 8 weeks that has the promise, that allows your team, that allows your leadership to look at it, your investors, in fact, right? To look at it and say, hey, I get it. Like, this is more promising and has more potential to hit that huge growth curve that you were looking for than what we have. And maybe the business has dried up a little bit because it was really being sustained by your like enormous effort. And the moment you took your foot off the gas, the whole thing kind of like died. Okay, well, what does that really say about the business if that was, all it took? Versus maybe the business is still going, and maybe you can run it with this low powered effort, or maybe it even sometimes leaving a business alone helps it grow more. And so maybe you discover something from your explorations that you bring back to the original business, and you're like, all right, this is the channel that's going to work for us to grow, that we figured out because we were messing around over there on this other thing. So, and then that's when you commit. That's when you make the noise. That's when you maybe do the staff cuts that unfortunately you probably have to do to extend your runway to get this out the door. But then everyone kind of understands, like, hey, this wasn't an arbitrary decision. This was something that we like thought about. And even the people who are cut will probably have a better understanding of like, yeah, it doesn't make sense for me to be a part of this business going forward because of what it's focused on and where it's going. So that's kind of like the key points in a nutshell about why I think more businesses, especially in those two frames that you've described, should consider it.
Yeah, and of course, there's a lot more detail in the book. So people that identify with being at the stage should definitely go ahead and read that and dive into more detail. I do want to reiterate one thing that you touched on, though, is that a pivot doesn't always mean just a complete rebirth of the company. Right? You think of like Slack pivoted from a in-game chat to what we know it today. Like, you have these kind of folklore stories of startups. A pivot sometimes could be the same product in a different market segment. It could be even staying in the same market segment. You just need to change the positioning, how you talk about it, the messaging. It could be a new channel or a series of channels. And of course, sometimes you do need to pivot the product, but maybe not the entire product. I would always look at that last, because obviously product is typically the hardest to change, just because of how much effort goes into it. Marketing messaging can often pivot faster. We're running out of time here. I want to close out with our typical lightning round. So I'll ask you a few questions. Tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. What's one book, newsletter, and or podcast that you find yourself recommending most often?
A book I really love is Dark Horses, and it's by Tadros and Ogi Ogas. It's about how to succeed in an unconventional way in a world that wants to kind of box you in. And I think it makes a lot of sense for entrepreneurs and outliers of any kind.
Okay, I'm going to check that one out. What's a productivity hack that you swear by? Hack or habit?
I'm going to shout out my friends, Ricky and David, for this company that they've built called Flow Club. And Flow Club is a way to body double. You get on Zoom and you're getting on a video call. You kind of announce what you're trying to do, and you have a 60, 90, 2-hour block where you kind of co-work, and you have the camera on, and you can kind of check off tasks. You can see other people checking off tasks. So it's a really great way to stay productive, feeling like you're with others, especially if you're an independent creator or someone who just isn't, in a lot of meetings and wants to have some of that office energy.
Yeah, super helpful. Since we went remote, I found something this sounds similar to FocusMate.
Yeah, very
Kind of
similar.
um, really helpful. Um, you've been YouTubing for 10 plus years. Any advice for someone who's either starting out in their career or starting out in their content creation, or entering that arena? Any advice for them?
Oh man, you really if you think about my my career on YouTube for 10 plus years, I just was joined YouTube partner. I'm not now I can monetize now. But really I've only started.
But you've been putting yourself out there, so
That's right.
um, I, I don't minimize that.
Yeah. Thank you. Really, it's the last few years that I've been kind of like returning to YouTube, and then I've been creating content in my newsletter and in other places for a number of years. Two things that I think are really, everyone says consistency, which is sort of fine. Yes, it's a good piece of advice. What I would say is thinking about how you open a piece of content and frame a piece of content is really important. Whether it's a video, whether it's a LinkedIn post, whether it's a newsletter, or the issue or the newsletter itself, the framing of it, how someone should understand whether or not to make the decision to spend time with it is really important. That's like the hook, the title, all these sort of opening lines, because we're so caught up in so many different activities, and people's attentions or spans are short, which we've heard before. But it's really like helping people make good decisions about where to spend their time. And I think spending more time at the beginning and in the framing of your content is something that I continue to come back to. And the other thing is, like, don't be afraid to repeat yourself. I often, I posted something online recently that I was like, I wrote a blog post about this 9 years ago, so this feels repetitive. But in fact, literally no one who's reading this now remembers or saw that blog post. So I think it really isn't bad to repeat yourself, especially if it's the topics you care the most about and the ideas
Sure.
you care the most about. Finding a new angle on them is important, and don't just like literally copy and paste, but like don't be afraid to talk about the same ideas again, especially if they're interesting to you.
Yeah, it's a good advice there. Last one here. What's a core value or principle that you live by or try to live by?
Oh, I've got a chart over here with my core values on the sign. So I think one of the ones that I like to come back to is like playing by my own rules. So I really, we talked about dark horses, we talked about systems, and I think playing by my own rules is really something that's important to me, which is I want to do things because they make sense for me, and not because other people sort of tell me that I need to do it. But then when I do make a commitment to myself, I want to fulfill it and really hold that as sacred, and not just sort of some people break promises to themselves. And I like Stephen Covey says, if you break promises to yourself, how can you make promises to anybody else? Right? Like, you should be capable of honoring your promises to yourself if you're even going to think about making promises to other people. So that's something that's really important to me.
Very powerful words. Jason, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. If you can close us out, share how can people reach you if they want to continue the conversation? How can they be helpful to you? And any final words that you want to share?
Yeah. Thank you again for having me on this show. Like, I have a soft spot for entrepreneurs, for founders, for any kind of outlier, people who have spiky talent and capabilities that are kind of beyond their peers, but also sometimes feel out of place with the rest of the world. So that's the kind of client that I tend to coach. So if that's something that resonates with you, I encourage you to reach out to me at jasonshen.com. My YouTube channel is at Coach Jason. And I'm also right now really focused on LinkedIn as a platform. So I think Twitter's kind of had its day, and Threads is for fun, but not serious yet. So LinkedIn is really, where I try to share some of my most direct thoughts with folks. So those are sort of three places for you to kind of find me.
Amazing. Well, I'll put all those links in the show notes. Jason, thank you. Wishing you a happy new year and wishing you all the best.
Happy New Year to you too, Moshe. Thank you so much.